The early morning mist hung low over the airfield in southern England, curling around the fuselages of Allied fighters like a shroud. It was February of 1943, and the war had reached a new, unpredictable phase in the skies over Europe. Reports had been coming in for months. Luftwaffe pilots flying a new fighter, faster, stronger, and more ruthless than anything the RAF had yet encountered. The aircraft was a Focke-Wulf 190, and had already earned a fearsome reputation. Spitfire squadrons had been caught off guard time and again, some pilots never returning from missions over occupied France. The stories filtered back. Airmen describing a plane that could climb faster than expected, die with terrifying speed, and outmaneuver them in ways that seemed almost impossible. Allied intelligence had long suspected that the Focke-Wulf 190 possessed a revolutionary design, but no report, no eyewitness account, and no aerial engagement could fully capture its capabilities. Pilots returned to base with wide eyes, their account a mix of awe and dread. Something about this machine defied ordinary tactics, forcing commanders to rethink everything they thought they knew about aerial combat. And then, by the twist of fate that only war can produce, one of these aircraft was captured intact. The plane had made an emergency landing in a field behind enemy lines, damaged but flyable. German crews had fled or been captured, leaving the Focke-Wulf 190 exposed. Allied engineers and test pilots were notified immediately. For the men who would see it up close for the first time, anticipation mixed with disbelief. They were about to confront a machine that had haunted their colleagues, a fighter whose very name, Focke-Wulf 190, had come to symbolize unmatched Luftwaffe superiority. As the truck carrying the aircraft approached the testing grounds, pilots lined the tarmac, engines idled, papers rustled, and binoculars swung into place. There was a hush, almost reverent. This was no ordinary day at the airfield. Some pilots whispered about rumors they'd heard, how the Focke-Wulf 190 could execute dives that made the Spitfire seem sluggish, or how it could roll sharply without the stalling tendencies that plagued earlier German fighters. Others remember reports from a few who had survived engagements, a plane that seemed to anticipate every move, responding almost instinctively to pilot inputs. The first inspection began with the obvious, the radial engine, a BMW 801, powerful and unusually compact. Mechanics crouched low, their fingers tracing the lines of the cowling and exhaust, noting the intricate cooling system. Unlike many Luftwaffe fighters, which struggled under prolonged maneuvers, this engine maintained consistent power, even under negative G conditions. Test pilots exchanged looks. This was more than an engine. It was a statement, a testament to meticulous design. Next came the armament. The aircraft's guns, two 20mm cannons and four 7.92mm machine guns, were examined, loaded, and tested. Engineers noted the recoil, the ammunition feeds, the firing synchronization. But what most captured their attention was the subtle integration of the weapons with the aircraft itself. The Focke-Wulf 190 had been designed to allow a pilot to aim and fire with minimal disruption to the flight path. Every control surface, every adjustment, had been tuned for precision. It was during the first test flight, however, that the true genius of the aircraft began to reveal itself. RAF pilots, many with hundreds of sorties behind them, climbed into the cockpit under strict supervision. As they performed rolls, dives, and turns, murmurs spread across the tarmac. The Focke-Wulf 190 moved almost as if it had a mind of its own. It required less physical effort to control, responding instantly to subtle inputs. A maneuver that would have taxed a Spitfire pilot to the limit was executed with fluid grace in the German fighter. It was here in the sky that the aircraft's reputation became tangible. Allied engineers took meticulous notes. They measured roll rates, climb speeds, dive angles, and control pressures. But the most important discovery was not numerical. It was intuitive. The Focke-Wulf 190 had been harmonized with the human pilot. Each control surface, each resistance curve, had been designed to complement reflexes, to reduce fatigue, and to enhance precision under stress. It was a machine that not only performed brilliantly, but elevated the abilities of the person controlling it. Observers on the ground felt the tension in their stomachs as test pilots pushed the plane to its limits. They described the sensation as almost hypnotic. The way the aircraft sliced through the sky, the subtle vibrations in the controls, the precision of its response. Many would later admit that for a brief, terrifying moment, they understood why Allied squadrons had been overwhelmed in battle. The Focke-Wulf 190 was not just another fighter. It was a lethal combination of engineering foresight, pilot-centered design, and battlefield experience distilled into steel and fabric. Even after landing, the aircraft inspired awe. Its durability was immediately apparent. Landing gear intact despite rigorous maneuvers, structural integrity uncompromised. Engineers examined every rivet, every panel, marveling at the attention to detail. Unlike many contemporaneous aircraft, this fighter could sustain damage and remain flyable, a critical factor in the brutal air battles over Europe. At the heart of it, there was one subtle element that Allied pilots could not stop remarking on. The Focke-Wulf 190 seemed to anticipate the natural limits of the human pilot. Where other aircraft demanded brute strength or continuous correction, this fighter felt like an extension of the pilot's own body. In the moments it mattered most, in combat at hundreds of feet per second, it behaved predictably, responsively, mercilessly. It was this one trick, invisible to the casual observer, that had made it unbeatable. The implications were immediately clear. Allied commanders convened to discuss tactics. Engineers drafted modifications for future fighters, and pilots studied the aircraft from every angle. Every report emphasized the same conclusion. The Focke-Wulf 190 was not simply a challenge. It was a revelation. Its lessons would shape Allied air strategy, influence aircraft design, and change the way pilots were trained. And yet, for all the data and analysis, there was a lingering human response that could not be quantified. Fear mixed with respect. Pilots who had flown against it, even now under controlled conditions, could not shake the memory of the first encounter over the channel. Engineers admitted they had underestimated the subtle integration of pilot and machine. The Focke-Wulf 190 had not merely been fast or armed. It had been engineered to dominate the instincts, reactions, and even the limitations of those who faced it. By evening, the aircraft rested quietly on the tarmac, engines cooled, wings still glinting in the fading sun. Test pilots gathered, still silent, absorbing what they had seen. Engineers closed their notebooks, aware they had glimpsed something exceptional. For the men of the Allied Air Forces, the day had begun as routine and ended with profound understanding. Some machines are not just tools of war. They are masterpieces of calculated lethality. And the Focke-Wulf 190, in its captured form, had revealed the terrifying truth behind the Luftwaffe's supremacy in the skies. In that quiet moment, the Focke-Wulf 190 seemed almost alive, a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and deadly intent. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, those watching could not help but wonder, how many more aircraft like this remained in the hands of the enemy, waiting to remind the world why the skies over Europe were so fiercely contested? Dawn broke over the airfield with a pale, hesitant light, casting long shadows across the freshly cut grass. The Focke-Wulf 190 sat at the center of the tarmac, its lines sharper, more deliberate than any Allied pilot had seen firsthand. Test pilots in flight jackets and helmets circled the aircraft, clipboard in hand, eyes tracing every curve of the fuselage, every panel, every seam. Today, the Allied Air Forces would not simply observe. They would fly it. They would probe its limits, measure its secrets, and try to understand how it had dominated countless engagements over the skies of France. The first pilots approached the cockpit with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Squadron leader Thomas "Tommy" Redman, veteran of the Battle of Britain, recalled in his later memoirs a moment he first touched the canopy frame. It felt precise, purposeful, he wrote. Everything about it suggested a machine built to win, not just survive. He climbed into the cockpit, hands on the controls, senses straining to anticipate the aircraft responses. The engines roared to life, the WWII radio vibrating with a force that was immediate and raw. Redman taxied the fighter down the airstrip, feeling the brakes respond sharply, the rudder react almost telepathically. The test pilots shared quiet, astonished glances. They had flown many advanced aircraft, but the Focke-Wulf 190 offered a feedback loop unlike any they had experienced. It was responsive without being twitchy, forgiving without being sluggish. As Red Man lifted off, the aircraft's full potential began to reveal itself. The climb rate was exceptional, but it was the handling in tight turns and abrupt rolls that drew murmurs from the observers below. Maneuvers that would push a Spitfire to the edge of its control limits were executed smoothly. Rolls were crisp, transitions between banks were seamless, and stalls, so feared in older German fighters, were almost impossible to induce. The Focke-Wulf 190 had been balanced in every sense. Aerodynamic surfaces, center of gravity, weight distribution, all calibrated for the pilot's instincts. On the ground, engineers began disassembling panels, examining the airframe in meticulous detail. Every control surface revealed subtle ingenuity. Hinges that reduced drag, linkages that minimized pilot effort, surfaces that remain effective even at high speed or extreme angles. The ailerons, for instance, were slightly smaller than Allied designs but more responsive, allowing the aircraft to roll sharply without inducing adverse yaw. Every mechanical choice had been carefully calculated to give Luftwaffe pilots an edge in dogfights. But the true revelation came when the test pilots attempted simulated combat maneuvers. Flying in formation with Spitfires, they tried conventional attacks, boom and zoom dives, turning engagements mock head-on passes. Time and again, the Focke-Wulf 190 performed in ways that defied expectation. It could dive steeply without the dangerous compressibility effects that troubled earlier German aircraft. It could pull up from a high-speed dive with minimal loss of control. And in a turn, it retained energy and momentum in a way that made pursuit extremely difficult. One RAF ace, Flight Lieutenant James Cartwright, recalled the first time he executed a mock attack. "I thought I had it," he said in a post-war interview. "I dove from above. I tried to force it into a turning fight, and it responded as if it could read my intentions. I had to pull out before the stress on my own aircraft became dangerous." Cartwright and others would later testify that this combination of raw power and intuitive handling was the secret of the Focke-Wulf 190's battlefield dominance. Yet the engineers and pilots were not content with surface impressions. Every system, every lever, and every control was measured. The engine was examined for power output at altitude. Instrument panels were scrutinized for pilot efficiency. Even minor details, the placement of the throttle, the resistance of the rudder pedals, the throw of the stick, were noted. The Focke-Wulf 190 was not just an aircraft. It was an extension of its pilot's body. Its design minimized fatigue, maximized control precision, and allowed the pilot to remain aware of both the aircraft position and the enemy's maneuvers. And then, the discovery that left every Allied pilot stunned. The trick. It was subtle, almost invisible, but devastating in practice. The landing gear and flaps were engineered to allow extremely fast, tight turns without destabilizing the aircraft. Combined with the radial engine's consistent torque and the aircraft's balanced control surfaces, it meant that a Luftwaffe pilot could execute rapid evasive maneuvers that few Allied aircraft could follow. Spitfires could climb, dive, and roll, but in a sustained dogfight, they could not match the Focke-Wulf 190's ability to change direction while maintaining energy. Test pilots attempted repeated mock engagements, chasing each other across the skies of England. Time after time, the Focke-Wulf 190 eluded them. They simulated head-on passes, climbing attacks, dives, and tight turns. They tried to force stalls to induce spins, but the aircraft's engineering resisted every attempt. Pilots began to realize that the true genius of this machine was not simply speed, firepower, or armor. It was the integration of control, response, and agility, designed to work in harmony with the pilot. Engineers marveled at the simplicity yet effectiveness of the design. The radial engine, cowling, and propeller were arranged to optimize airflow, reducing drag and maintaining stability at extreme speeds. The cockpit controls were arranged logically, minimizing time lost in high-stress combat situations. The airframe could sustain damage that would cripple lesser aircraft, allowing German pilots to return safely even when hit. Every aspect of the plane screamed of battlefield experience, of lessons learned in combat over France and the Eastern Front. By the end of the day, Allied pilots had flown dozens of sorties, examined every system, and debated the implications. It became painfully clear that any encounter with a Focke-Wulf 190 in the skies of Europe required a reconsideration of strategy. Fighter tactics would have to adapt. Aircraft design would need to incorporate lessons from this machine. And pilots would have to respect the aircraft's capabilities, or risk paying with their lives. The men on the ground could only watch as a captured aircraft taxied back after yet another flight. Engines humming, wings gleaming in the afternoon sun. There was no exaggeration in their reports. The Focke-Wulf 190 was a revelation. Its one trick, the perfect synergy between pilot and machine, was not a gimmick, not a single modification or weapon. It was a principle, an embodiment of engineering precision and combat experience. Allied pilots had not only witnessed superior technology, they had seen a fighter that taught a lesson in psychological dominance, in anticipation, in efficiency. And for the engineers, the lesson was humbling. Every adjustment, every rivet, every calculation had been made to enhance survivability and lethality. The Focke-Wulf 190 was more than a plane. It was a school in the skies, teaching Allied pilots exactly why they lost so many comrades in the air battles of 1942 and early 1943. As dusk fell, the airfield was quiet. Mechanics and pilots walked past the aircraft with a new understanding. For the first time, the abstract reports of German air superiority took on flesh and steel. The Focke-Wulf 190 was fast, deadly, and almost prescient in its flight. And while the Allies would go on to develop counters, tactics, and improved aircraft, the memory of the day spent with a captured fighter would linger, a stark reminder of what human ingenuity, refined through experience and necessity, could produce in the crucible of war. Even years later, when pilots recounted their experiences, the details remained vivid. The subtle control harmonization, the power-to-weight ratio, the flawless integration of pilot and plane, it was all remembered with awe. The Focke-Wulf 190 had not simply been an opponent. It had been a teacher, demonstrating the brutal efficiency of the Luftwaffe's engineering and the terrifying precision of its design philosophy. The sky above England had offered a rare gift, a glimpse behind enemy lines, into mind of German engineers, and the secrets that had made one of the war's most feared aircraft nearly unbeatable. And yet, for all the technical data collected, for all the measurements and diagrams, there remained one inescapable truth. In the hands of a skilled Luftwaffe pilot, the Focke-Wulf 190 was almost unstoppable, a predator in the air, perfected by necessity and honed by war. The following morning, the airfield was shrouded in a thick, rolling fog. Visibility dropped to barely a few hundred meters, creating an eerie, almost silent battlefield where only engines could speak. Test pilots gathered around the captured Focke-Wulf 190, their breath visible in the cold, early light. There was a quiet tension, the kind that grips a group of men who have glimpsed something exceptional and dangerous. Squadron leader Redman climbed into the cockpit once more. This time, he was determined to push the aircraft beyond what they had attempted the day before. The engine started smoothly, the radial hum vibrating through his bones. Taxing into the fog, Redman could feel the aircraft almost guiding him, as if it had a will of its own. He released the brakes, and the Focke-Wulf 190 responded instantly, sliding forward with an agility that made the Spitfires look cumbersome in comparison. Once airborne, the true drama began. Redman executed a series of steep dives and tight rolls, testing the aircraft's ability to resist compressibility and maintain energy. Every maneuver was precise, almost surgical. He pulled into a hard bank, expecting the aircraft to protest or shudder, but it didn't. It responded with flawless balance, the ailerons slicing the sky with terrifying efficiency. Back on the ground, engineers and pilots watched on with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Flight Lieutenant Cartwright's voice, recorded later in a debrief, captured the mood. It was as though the aircraft anticipated what I wanted to do before I even thought it. Every roll, every pull, every dive, perfect. I've never felt anything like it. You could almost imagine a Luftwaffe pilot laughing up there, knowing the aircraft would do exactly what he needed it to survive. Then came the demonstration that revealed the deadly trick in full. The test pilot simulated a dogfight with Spitfires that tried every tactic. Climbing attacks, boom and zoom passes, steep dives. The Focke-Wulf 190 consistently evaded or outmaneuvered them. The secret was subtle. The aircraft combination of radial engine torque, compact design, and perfectly balanced control surfaces allowed it to execute high-speed, tight turns without sacrificing energy, a maneuver the Spitfires could not follow without losing speed or altitude. One by one, the pilots realized what made the aircraft nearly unbeatable in skilled hands. It wasn't a single innovation, a new weapon, or a powerful engine alone. It was a harmonious integration of every component. The engine, propeller, control surfaces, weight distribution, and cockpit ergonomics, all designed to maximize pilot reaction and effectiveness. The aircraft didn't just fly. It danced with the pilot, anticipating moves, forgiving mistakes, and punishing hesitation. As Red Man brought the plane in for a final landing, the fog wrapped around the airfield like a ghostly curtain. Mechanics and engineers walked toward him with solemn expressions. No applause, no cheers, just silent recognition of something extraordinary. The Focke-Wulf 190 was more than an aircraft. It was a revelation, a lesson in the lethal efficiency of design, an experience refined under the pressures of war. The post-flight analysis deepened their understanding. Engineers examined the wing structure, discovering how the dihedral angle and subtle twist gave the aircraft superior roll and lift characteristics at varying speeds. Test pilots noted the radial engine's torque curve, which allowed for sustained acceleration without compromising stability in tight maneuvers. Every small detail mattered. Every tiny design choice contributed to the plane's battlefield superiority. Reports filed that day emphasized a sobering truth. Allied pilots had underestimated German engineering, and the Focke-Wulf 190 had been a formidable adversary because of its subtle but overwhelming advantages. Combat reports from the Western Front began to make sense. The aircraft wasn't just fast or well-armed. It could outturn, outclimb, and outdive most contemporary Allied fighters in skilled hands. For the pilots who flew the captured fighter, the lessons were personal and enduring. They had felt the fear and awe of facing such a machine in combat, even though they were flying it themselves. Flight Lieutenant Cartwright later wrote, "You can train a pilot, you can train a squadron, but the aircraft itself gave the Luftwaffe a fighting chance no one could ignore. And I could feel that, even in our own hands." Historians would later note that these examinations were pivotal. The insights gained helped Allied engineers adapt tactics and inform future fighter designs. Modifications to wing profiles, engine power distribution, and control responsiveness in later Spitfires and Tempests bore the fingerprints of lessons learned from a Focke-Wulf 190. In a way, the captured aircraft had extended its influence beyond the battlefield, shaping the evolution of Allied air power. But for those who were there, the emotional impact lingered. It wasn't just data or diagrams that they carried home. It was a memory of flight itself, the sensation of being in a cockpit that felt alive, that moved in anticipation of thought, that responded perfectly to human input. The Focke-Wulf 190 had been built for war, and in its veins ran the essence of every dogfight it had survived. As dusk fell over the airfield, the plane rested silently under canvas covers. Observers walked past, heads bowed slightly, a mix of respect and unease in their expressions. For a moment, the war seemed distilled into a single machine, a reminder of the ingenuity, danger, and human cost of the skies over Europe. The Focke-Wulf 190 was more than a fighter. It was a lesson, a challenge, and a testament to what a single, well-conceived design could accomplish. In the years after the war, the stories of pilots who flew captured aircraft took on almost mythic quality. Veterans spoke of the Focke-Wulf 190 in hushed tones, remembering the first climb, the first dive, the first moment they realized the aircraft's uncanny ability to outmaneuver them. And though technology would continue to advance, the psychological imprint of those hours in the cockpit, the awe, the tension, the respect for a machine that seemed to anticipate human action, remained vivid. For the Allied pilots, the captured Focke-Wulf 190 was a teacher and a warning. It revealed the ingenuity and precision that went into Luftwaffe engineering and underscored the harsh truth of aerial warfare. Skill and technology together could render even the bravest adversary nearly powerless. Every turn, every roll, every climb and dive told a story of survival, adaptation, and the razor-edge advantage that could mean life or death in the air. In the end, the plane was returned to storage, its secrets cataloged and analyzed, Allied pilots returned to their own squadrons, forever changed by the lessons learned from a single, captured aircraft. The Focke-Wulf 190 had earned its fearsome reputation in combat, and now, through careful study, it had earned the respect of those who once sought to destroy it. The skies had been a proving ground, and the Focke-Wulf 190 had proven itself. Not through luck, not through a single weapon or speed advantage, but through meticulous design, superior engineering, and a subtle, almost invisible trick that combined power, control, and human intuition into a lethal whole. Even decades later, the story of that captured fighter resonates. A reminder that the edge in war often lies in the details, in the small, deliberate choices that turn ordinary machines into extraordinary instruments of survival and dominance. The Allied pilots who flew it never forgot that feeling, the sensation of touching perfection in the form of metal and engine and human ingenuity, and the knowledge that for every pilot who faced in battle, the skies have been a far more dangerous place than they could have imagined. The Focke-Wulf 190 had been unbeatable, not because it was invincible, but because it had been designed with an understanding of war, of men, and of the deadly dance between them. And in that understanding, it left a legacy that would shape the air war for years to come.